Hello there, welcome into the webinar today. My name is Stephen Ball. I'm the Pre-Sales Director here at Embarcadero, and joining me online is Antonio Zapater. Hi, Antonio.
Hi there, pleasure to join you.
So we're going to be looking at RAD Server today, and we're going to be kind of actually running through looking at a real-world example of how it's being used. And we like the technology so much, we actually used it ourselves for a live event that we had. So one of the events we had in London at the beginning of the year at the Kia Oval, we actually used RAD Server to enable us to interact with all the customers who are there and to be able to ensure we can get some great information back to them afterwards. And it really just kind of highlighted how quick and easy it is to actually add some great value onto existing applications using RAD Server. So the kind of premise for the brief that we kind of set up originally, and we actually kind of set this up as a bit of a welcome to the company for Antonio to kind of get in and have a play with. Antonio's background, is brilliantly 15 odd years working in retail sector, has got quite a bit of multi-tier experience behind him, and hadn't used RAD Server before. So one of the best ways to be able to understand it and help people and advise them is to actually play with it. So within a few weeks, we set up this idea that we wanted to be able to register people for the event, and we wanted to be able to kind of generate the name tags for them, and then at the event provide the name tags out, but actually use them as a way to interact with everybody and be able to quickly record down specific things that people were interested in, so we could then send them kind of follow-up information. We've got some great info docs around on different products and aspects to help developers move forward. We wanted to make sure we could send the right things out to different people, and also if they had specific things that they wanted followed up on, that we had a way to take some notes and record them. So the whole kind of premise was kind of founded, and from that we created a mobile application and a desktop application. So the desktop application was basically a VCL application, probably like a lot of you are using today, with a database on the back end and client server kind of operations connecting across the network to the data. And what this provided was a way for us to be able to register people who are interested in the event and to put their details in and to store them. But what you kind of find is that when you're out on the road, you can't really take your database server with you, and the connections that you'd normally have on a local network, that you don't have that same stability. Working over Wi-Fi, working over mobile networks where sockets are up and down all the time, you kind of have some different challenges, and that's really where you come into the world of REST. And RAD Server is a full MEAP, a mobile enterprise application platform, that provides the ability to serve your data from your server out in a RESTful way, so you don't have to have that constant connection. And using that data service, we're then able to build with FireMonkey, a mobile application for the staff to use, but also a web application that calls the same APIs. And the example we used here was Sencha. It was available to us within the Architect Edition, so we were able to put a web app together quite quickly using kind of the components within Sencha. And we then had something that people could use directly from their phone to scan their own QR code and log in and tell us what they're interested in, what they wanted information sent to them on. But also for the staff to be able to check people in and to be able to kind of record any information and notes from their interactions with people at the event. So a great way to add some great customer service, and it's all built as an extra to sit alongside the existing architecture that was there for the VCL application. Now, the reason we're kind of explaining this up front here is it's really quite a cool way to be able to expand out. And from a developer's point of view, we're always looking at how we can help our customers get more out of our systems that we've got there, how we can expand the business logic that we have today and provide more value out to our customers. But also, we want to make sure that our customers can stay with us for a longer period of time. And we'll talk a little bit about microservices later on. But this is a great way to be able to get your customers hooked further into what you're offering and to provide additional things out to them that link seamlessly back into the back end without all the challenges that you'd have about trying to move data in lots of different places. So with that kind of quick ground setting, I'm going to hand over to Antonio to take us through the app.
Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction. As you mentioned, I've been a Delphi developer for the last 15 years. I own my own company and I worked in the retail sector. But once I joined Embarcadero, I actually didn't know much about FileMonkey and neither RAD Server. So I wanted to learn how to use these tools, and it was quite shocking how easy I could reuse all my Delphi knowledge and apply it to the FileMonkey and the RAD Server environments. So we came up with this idea that you nicely explained already. It's an application that connects to a database, a visual application actually. And then we added an extra layer functionality on top using FlyMonkey and RAD Server. So let's quickly jump into the code so we can see what actually we created. And we have here the project, which is the VCL application. This is probably more than common to you. We have the grids, we have the tabs. So let's quickly compile this. And this is connecting to an interface database. And we can see the data. We have the attendees. We can also create events. We can create products. This is very standard. So to see how this works, let's do an actual example. We have here Abby Spencer, and we're going to assign this attendee to an event. In this case, let's say that she's attending the London conference. And now if we come to event and we come to attendees, we can see here that Abby is attending the event. And we can also print all those badges that we saw in that picture and a slide before. We're using Fast Report for this. So if we print, we just need to select this isn't Delphi, sorry. The Fast Report, because we have different templates, because we've been doing different events. So we have multiple templates. They should be right here. London final batch. So here you can see that Abby Spencer now has her own batch. So we're going to export this as a PDF, and you'll see later why. Let's name it batches. Okay. I don't want to go into too much detail. We can even handle from here all the stuff that is going to use this the FileMonkey application. So they have credentials and we're using here the RAD server built-in authentication system. But now let's come to the FileMonkey application file. I think it's this one. Yeah. So this is a FileMonkey application, and in this case, we even used the new biometric authentication. It wasn't on the first version, but because the app got quite popular, we started to implement new features. And with the launch of 11.3, we had available this very cool little component that makes authentication on mobile that simple, because you just need to do the authentication success or fail. It's super easy implementation of this functionality. So now we're going to compile it first for Windows, and we can roughly see what the application does, and then we will see running on iOS and Android as well. In this case, we can see now that we have all the events. We remember that we have the London event. So if we access now here, we can see that Abby is assigned to the event, but she hasn't attended. So once we access the details, we can see the same details we created in the VCL application, but now we have the functionality on through the application to decide that Abby has attended the event. And now all that has been synced automatically to the same database that we have with Interbase. And we even added extra functionality for international events, for live translation and handling who checked in and checked out headphones. Just an example of how the application slowly grew in functionalities the more it was used. And also all the products that we created in the VCL application. We can decide which products this attendee is interested, and also a functionality that is not in the VCL application, which is taking notes live during the event. We scan the QR code of an attendee, and we can access the details. and off you go. You can take a node and then you can export that afterwards and keep track of all the nodes that each member, because remember that we need credentials to access this app, so we know who took these nodes and when they were taken. And now, because I'm running a virtual machine here, if I move to my main desktop, we can see that we have an iOS application running on the iOS emulator. In this case, this is possible because I have an Apple Silicon MacBook Pro. So you can even compile your applications straight away to the iOS emulator. If you have an Android phone, that's way easier because you just need to configure, activate, developer mode. And then you can compile it straight away from Delphi to your Android phone. Let's type the credentials. In this case, I'm going to access with the user Antonio. And I'm going to try to type right for a change. And there you go. We're in the app now. And in this case, the user Antonio only has access to the event in London, even though we have multiple events created in the internal app. I defined a more granular role system that you can define which users have access to which events. So we access now, we can see that the app looks pretty much the same, but if we access the tabs, for example, FileMonkey takes care of this automatically. So we now have the tabs at the bottom instead of on the top as a standard Windows application, but the functionality is pretty much the same. Now what we're going to do to make this even more interesting, I have right here an Android phone that we can see here. I'm going to open the application that I have here. Let's type the same user. Let's see if this time I type it right, which is a super secret password. There you go. Now we have the application here running, same functionality. We can see that Abby, because I marked those interests, these products, they are already synced automatically as well in this application because everything is live. And now the cool bit, we have the batches that I exported a minute ago, and we have the batch for Abby. So let's activate the camera. And if we scan Abby, it takes us straight away to her details. So we can see all the information. And again, we can access the interests, take notes, etc., all automatically. If the users or the attendees scan the QR code, it takes them to a web app that was developed with Sencha, and they have access to some of the information. This is something we thought it will be cool as well, so we can show how granular the resources can be shared through RAD Server. So they just need to type the email as a security measure. We didn't want to make it too complex because it's more like a proof of concept. But once they type their email, they can access to tab which products they're interested, and they can send feedback as well that they're recorded as notes. So yeah, very cool stuff. And I did all this in pretty much a month. So I learned, I didn't have any experience with FileMonkey or RAD Server before, even though I had obviously knowledge about REST APIs and I knew how they should be developed. But I didn't know the technology, and it was just amazing how quickly you can have this type of functionalities developed using all these tools.
Yeah, it was a real baptism of fire for you getting in and going.
Yeah.
But the great thing is, if we look at the composite parts that we've got here, this is all stuff that everybody's used to. It's master detail relationships, having an event is the master, having a list of attendees is the detail. All this stuff is just general master detail, and even down to the handouts that are on there. When you select the products, it then provides a list of handouts based on the products. All of this is just simple master detail relationships. But being able to package them together under a set of REST APIs to then encapsulate the business logic on the server, and then be able to use that wherever you want to go. And that's the same business logic that is then reflected on the web application, as the desktop application, as the mobile application. Really, really simple to be able to extrapolate that and push it forward. So yeah, very, very cool. So now we've got a kind of a brief overview of kind of the app. What we want to do is take you back and take you through some of the concepts within REST development. As Antonio said, there's a few bits to learn to kind of get going. And what we want to do is we want to give you that same help to get moving forward here. So we're going to start off having a look at what a REST API is, talk over some of the basic elements that go through that, talk a little bit more about RAD Server and some of the capabilities in there. RAD Server is a full, what we call MEAP, Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. Doesn't mean it's only used for mobile, but it's typically the first domain area that MEAPs were being targeted for because of the connectivity issues that we mentioned earlier, between your traditional client-server applications and then applications you need to take on the move. And that's been fantastic. So what we'll do is we'll take you through a really simple example of how to use and connect to data, and then finish off with a few kind of other useful tools and bits to help you along the way. So the REST API architecture, normally you've got your database at the back end. You may have other third-party systems that you're connecting into, but what you want to be able to do is provide a single point of sign-on that you can then access into all those systems. And what we do is we create through a REST API a middle tier or an application layer that allows you to abstract away what's going on behind it. So if you do want to change your database, for example, we've heard a lot of people moving from Oracle recently because of the changes that they're making in terms of their licensing and their pricing structures. And if you wanted to change your database on the back end, by having that middle tier like RAD Server, you're then not having to change the clients because you can keep that transparent. So with the data coming through, you're then able to service those requests out to any number of customers using requests. So these are done over HTTP or HTTPS. You have the request goes in, and then you get a response come back out. So very similar to SOAP in the past. The interchange here can be JSON, it can be XML, but what we do is we use the HTTP verbs to get a list of users, to post, which is to kind of insert, to put, which then updates a specific user. You can choose a get with a specific ID as well, which then returns back just a single user. And then also there's the delete when you pass in the user ID to delete a record. So that's your basic create, update, insert, delete methods using standard HTTP verbs. So the interchange that we use here traditionally is JSON now. So if you're not used to JSON, very, very simple method. You have curly brackets to indicate a JSON object, and then you use name value pairs. So you have a user ID, and then it gives you the value. You have a name, and then it gives you the value. So where XML was a lot more verbose, providing more metadata to say, hey, this is a string, and here's the start, and here's the end. JSON is a lot simpler data packet, much more appropriate for sending data packets over mobile networks where you need to have it as minified as possible. And then there's things like arrays as well. So if you have a look there at hobbies, you can see you've got the square brackets indicating that there's an array in there. And then also addresses, which has got a JSON array in there. So here we've got multiple addresses and each one's got a JSON object in it. You can see the curly brackets start and end indicating the individual objects. So pretty straightforward to read. And the great thing is there's some great components to be able to transform your data sets to and from JSON and do all that kind of transformation for you. There's a number of components and frameworks within RAD Studio to help you if you wanted to code your own JSON for specific kind of tasks. So maybe you want to send in a few different variables and then do some logic based on those and then call some different database actions and then sort something out and send it the response back. You can build those up, and that's something we'll kind of point you to the documentation for doing, but very, very easy to be able to pick up and use the architecture. So we've spoken a little bit about some of the transports here, but RAD Server, as I mentioned earlier, it's a full mobile enterprise application platform. It's that middle tier that you can deploy. Now, the great thing with RAD Server is you can deploy it either in the cloud or you can deploy it on site. And we actually have a few different versions of RAD Server, which we'll touch on later. And we have obviously the developer edition, which allows you to develop and build locally on your machine and runs the whole of RAD Server out via a little application. We also have RAD Server Lite, which is kind of the next step on from the developer edition that allows you to deploy an application for small scale deployments to quickly get up and going. And then you can take the same setup and configuration from RAD Server Lite to actually the full version. which you can deploy across and load balance and do a whole load of stuff on web servers with, so you can really scale to huge quantities. And what it allows you to do is to migrate your data and your access, as we've seen, across to this kind of web service architecture. And you can then build applications, as we've seen, for VCL, for FireMonkey, and even into the web, based off those services that you've got. So very, very simple to set up and really easy to deploy. You know, just like any web broker application, you can deploy it under IIS, under Apache, and there's even Docker instances, so you can pick up and use this under continuous integration build environments. So finally, I say it is a full backend, and there's a huge amount of content that and features that go into there. If you think a bit like you know, building a shop, you might kind of go to an empty shell of a shop and you need to kind of build, you know, maybe you want to make it a restaurant, you need to kind of build all the kitchen, you want to build the front of desk, you need to build the tables and the chairs and do all the decorations and everything else you want to do with it. Or you can come in and you can use something like RAD Server that provides multi-tenancy support. It provides API analytics, so you can analyze, you know, what APIs are being called and when, to see if there's stuff that you need to maintain or not, and also find out when it's a good time to do maintenance schedules. There's things like Swagger API documentation in there. It allows you to provide documentation for other languages to quickly and rapidly connect into RAD Server. And there's push notification support, so you can actually send notices to the clients to say, hey, something's happened on the server here, or a change to data that you're interested in, come and refetch what you need, rather than having constant connections that you'd normally do on a client server applications. Active Directory support, so you can choose your own sign-in methodology. Again, all these types of capabilities are built straight out of the box. And there's a whole load more as well. So I think, as I say, we mentioned a few of the other bits that are there, but what I want to do now is hand back to Antonio now, and we're going to take you through basically a few quick samples of how to get up and going and show you literally how easy it is to start that coding journey with RAD Server.
Thank you, Stephen. Even though we've seen already a bit of RAD Server, it was a bit of an overkill to start with. So we're going to start from the very beginning, and we're going to see a very, very simple example that you can actually download and play around with it. You have it on GitHub. You can scan this QR code, and it's publicly available. So you just need to download it, compile it, and analyze the code. But I want to talk about it first here in this presentation. Let me quickly close all the stuff I left open. And I'm going to open this very project that it's available on GitHub. So this project is a very simple VCL application that connects straight away to a RAD Server backend. If we access first the RAD Server project, it has a unit, and we can see here again the same structure I mentioned before, which is a query, and that's linked to an EMS dataset resource. The database, it's very, very simple. It just has one table, which is called tasks. And we have a FireDAC connection, and this EMS dataset resource linked to the query. If we access the code, it's nearly no code whatsoever. We just need to define the resource name. In this case, it's going to be data. And then we have the resource suffix, which is tasks. And because the EMS dataset resource is under this, it's going to create automatically for us all the endpoints. We can see here, and then allowed actions. We have the list, get, post, put, delete that Stephen mentioned before in introduction to REST API. So we don't need to code around endpoints manually, even though you could as well. If you want a more advanced functionality, you can code your own endpoints. But RAD Studio offers this functionality out of the box without you needing to code much. So let's compile this RAD Server instance. And if we analyze here, we can see that we have data, tasks, and then all the endpoints for get, post, and delete has been created automatically for us. So a nice way to test this is if we access localhost, the data resource was data, and then we can access tasks. And then off you go. We have a JSON response, and we have encoded not one line. This is the three records that we have in the table. But now what we're going to do is use this functionality to access through a VCL application. So we have this other project here, simple task client, that if we access the form, let's compile this. In this case, we have a button. This is fetch. And then the VCL application automatically pulled that JSON data, converted to a mem table, and then using standard, well, in this case, it's an FMX application, so you can compile this to any platform, but the functionality would be exactly the same for VCL. So we pull the JSON data, and now we can edit all this. Let's say, let's rename this with Antonio. And the change has been done, but hasn't been pushed yet to the server because this demo has a cache mode. So this is very handy, mostly when you're developing mobile applications, because in case you don't have constant internet connection, you want to cache all that data in your application and then push it once you have internet connection back. So we can track all the changes. In this case, we have one change so far, and we can see here in the RAD server log, the ones, let's change something else as well. Let's remove this foo. So now we have two changes. Same thing, we create a new row, record, sorry, we will get exactly the same thing, an extra change. So now once we press save, we can see here in the log the two put methods were sent to the backend. So now these changes have been saved. If we want to analyze how this works, it's very simple to debug all this with a tool that maybe not all of you know, which is called the REST debugger, and you can find it here. You can use it for RAD server, but you can also use it for any other backend or third-party APIs you're using. So in this case, we're going to use this endpoint that, as you can see, is exactly the same one we used before, the data tasks. So if we send a request, now we get here the body, the same thing we saw on the browser, but we have this handy button here, which is copy components. Even if we access here the tabular data that it creates for us already grid, and we can see all the data converted to a mem table. But the cool bit is if you copy components, we can see that now we have on the clipboard all the required components to access this endpoint in a RAD Studio application. So this is pretty much what we can see here. We have the REST client, which is to access the backend. We have the GET request, and we have the response. We have the response dataset adapter, which is pretty much the same thing we've seen with RAD server that converts a query to JSON. In this case, this component does the opposite. It gets the JSON and it converts it to a mem table. And we have here the mem table. So if I, in this case, yes, so you can see properly, I'm going to paste. So you can see that it creates all the components for you automatically. But let's just reuse this one. So if I execute the request, all that goes straight away automatically, and we can see here that the data has been fetched and already imported in the mem table automatically. So yeah, this is a very, very cool demo that you can play around with. You can analyze the code and break things, which is the way to learn. And feel free to use RAD Server because it's included already with RAD Studio. It's as simple as, if in case you want to play around and create a new project with RAD Server, you just need to come here to File New, you access Others, and here you have the tab, RAD Server. And it's as simple as, in case you want to create a new package with resource, which is very, very simple. Let's call this data. And you can create sample endpoints, or you can even link this to a database endpoint as well, and everything will be created for you automatically. Let's quickly see this example. So we have the connection available we have in our database. Let's access tasks, which is the one we were seeing just a second ago. And here we have the list of all the tables that we have available in our database. So let's select tasks, we create finish. And in this case, all this has been created for us automatically. And
That looks
we're
very
going to have
familiar.
pretty much the same example. But in this case, because I chose as well to create two endpoints, we have the get method here that we would need to do our own implementation. In this case, it's created with just a simple JSON string. And then we have the get item that whatever we pass to as a parameter, it will be returned for us. We can see here as well, not going to go into too much detail, but using all these attributes is how you create all the OpenAPI documentation that will be exported automatically to a YAML file or JSON file. Then you can use Swagger and OpenAPI to access all this documentation and even share it with third parties or in your own team. If you have a complex API, this is the way to go to document your API so people can understand what they can achieve with them. And this is pretty much it. As I said, RAD Server is included. Just give it a shot, try it, because it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I think I really like the way that RAD Server uses a lot of the modern language constructs like attributes just to be able to implement all that functionality. You know, you don't need to do any coding. You just need to write down a couple of attributes against the procedure that you got there. And you know, there's some great resources that we'll get into the book quickly now and the other stuff that's around to show you where to go. But you know, it's really quite quick and simple to be able to define up what you're going to return and information that you need to provide back, even down to kind of specific parameters that are being provided via you know, individual custom API endpoints. So yeah, really cool.
Okay, let's come back to the slides. As I mentioned, here you have the QR code. You will download the task example that Stephen coded himself. And it comes with a database and everything, so you just need to add it as an available database. You use this interface, and you will be able to play around with this project.
Okay,
We've talked
great.
about. Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, carry
No,
on.
that's right. That's right. Go. We've spoken a little bit about the REST debugger. So the example that we just had a look at there used the local URL, and then also had the rest of the parameter on the parameters tab. You can test against any REST API out there. It doesn't need to be RAD Server. You've got all the authentication and connection stuff that's in there as well. So this makes it really flexible to start building up against any API. And there's a whole load out there. You know, if you have a look at the API layer, which is another one of the companies from Idera, you know, that's a great set of APIs to be able to check bank details or to verify, you know, your credit card details, to, you know, work out you've got different ingredients in the fridge. You know, what can you make with it? You know, there's a whole host of APIs depending on what you're looking and needing, and you can rapidly connect to those and pull the components that you need straight into your application just from using this tool. It's really powerful. So we mentioned the analytics earlier. We won't spend time jumping into there today, but there's a console that you can launch up from the developer edition to jump straight in, have a look at the endpoints. You can deploy that into production. It's automatically logged and tracked into RAD Server, so you can then analyze, you know, who's using what APIs when. You know, it's great from a security point of view, but also just from a pure management point of view, knowing what's being used, how it's being used, if the new stuff that you've been asked to do is actually being picked up and used or not. You know, it's really powerful and a great thing to have in your tool bucket. So Antonio, do you want to take us through the kind of the evolution of what we're seeing? And
Oh yeah. Well, here we have we're going to talk briefly about this because I think a lot of people are fairly familiar with this concept that technology has evolved quite a lot since we started developing applications in the 80s. The first approach, it was a very monolithic development, which was pretty much all the business logic and data access layer very coupled with the user interface. So we have an application that did pretty much everything, and it just connected to a database through the network. Obviously, that infrastructure was very difficult to scale, mostly once the internet kicked off. So then we moved to a more fairly decoupled business logic and data access layer that we still had the user interface, but we had technologies, for example, like DataSnap that we I mean, it's still quite valid nowadays, but it was one of the first products that Embarcadero launched and allowed to have that obfuscation, let's say, about the backend and the database. You just connect it to your backend and access or the business logic and the database information, but you really didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. Again, that was a big step forward, but it was complicated to scale as well. So now we're moving more to this microservice scenario where we have multiple services running connected to the user interface, and we even have microservices that they don't talk to the user interface and they're just internal. For example, for login or stuff like that, and they even have multiple databases connected. Or microservices that don't even talk to our backend, like Google Maps. We just show the user the Google Maps, and we don't know what the user is doing with it. It's a very complex but extremely powerful system. And RAD Server lands very nicely because you can create your own microservices with RAD Server, and you can have fully independent and decoupled services. That the main benefit is one of the services fail. Let's say, for example, your login system fails, which is not ideal, but is not a crucial part of your application. Then the user can keep using your application and connect to the backend. That's why microservices also allow you to scale horizontally parts of your application that require more resources. For example, if you're having a peak of sales because of Christmas, let's say, then you need to deploy more instances of your API. It's a very, very cool topic. I'm really interested in microservices, as you can tell. And RAD Server really lands nicely when it comes to these new type of technologies.
yeah, I think what we've seen from customers. Sorry, just jump back onto that previous slide, Antonio. We've had a lot of people who have been looking at how they can gain more from their existing development, and quite often a lot of RAD Studio applications have been around for a number of years, and there's a lot of business logic and a lot of content that's built into there, and being able to expose some of that via an API that you can control the inputs and the output from means that you can kind of be embedded into a much wider architecture, which makes it a lot harder for customers to take your product out at the end of the day as well, which helps protect your code investment. It helps you get new life from your code investment, and open up new revenue streams. And that is one of the things that is very common now. We're seeing a lot of companies now picking up, and rather than trying to have a CRM system that does absolutely everything, they might say, well, look, this is the best accounting system, let's connect to that, but we need to then also make sure that we're connecting across to this product over here or that product over here, and using multiple different applications to bring them all together. And with RAD Server, you can literally be the glue that sticks everything together and helps provide that single sign-on experience where possible, and it makes life a lot more interesting and valuable from the work that you've already done, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we mentioned earlier that there's a few different licensing options. RAD Server Lite is free, that's embedded in and part of what you get with the Enterprise Edition. That is there. The single site and the multi-site, everything that you deploy across any version of RAD Server, the binaries are the same, the configuration's the same. If it's deployed through kind of a small standalone application, which is like a mini web server, which is what the Lite Edition is, which is limited to using Interbase to go as the back end. So it's not designed for scaling to hundreds of connections. It's designed for small deployments. But then we also have the single site and the multi-site licensing. You get a single site license with Enterprise, a multi-site license with Architect. We also have OEM licensing available if you need to leave the license with the customer and you need something more than the Lite version. So plenty of options, and it really is pretty straightforward to get up and going. I know that a lot of people were scared off originally from RAD Server with some pretty complicated and hard to understand licensing. It's not like that at all anymore. So I definitely say connect up with your local sales rep, and it's very trying as hard as we can to simplify this down to a very, very easy and simple to deploy options. And for a lot of people, the multi-site license is pretty strong options. So definitely worth checking that out, which comes with Architect. So Antonio mentioned, he was able to get up and going pretty quickly in a few weeks, going from zero to hero. As you see, he's done an amazing job in getting this application out, and it's had rave reviews everywhere that he's spoken and done the demos of the application. But the foundations for getting going are some pretty basic stuff that's out there. DocWiki has got some great documentation in there. There's some amazing stuff on YouTube. The subtasks sample that Antonio's shown you, again, there's a video there taking you through that, and will help you through getting going with basic CRUD applications. But also there's a RAD server guide that's been put together. Now, the initial draft of this was done by David I a few years ago, and in fact, Antonio has become such an expert now in RAD server. He's in the middle of getting the latest version of that refreshed and updated with some new samples, new chapters, a much fresher kind of look and feel and stuff. The existing edition is still worth downloading, but definitely keep an eye out for the new edition as that comes through. That's got some amazing stuff and great samples coming through as well. So, Antonio, unless there's anything else to add?
Not really. I think the only thing I can say is that if you haven't played around with RAD Server and you have Delphi or C++ installed, just give it a go, because you cannot imagine how easy it is to just connect it to your current database and publish an API. You don't need to start with a complex project. Because it's not like migrating your whole database. Maybe you just need to publish 2 or 3 tables and to connect it to this kind of services you were talking about, like your an external accounting. So it's a great way to add functionality to your current database without the need of rewriting the whole application or migrating to a completely different technology.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's about taking steps.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be, everything. It doesn't have to be
Exactly.
a revolution. It's just an evolution, and it's a great way to expand and help on. So,
and also,
brilliant.
it's quite organic, because once you start publishing a few tables that maybe that you really need to have, then you start seeing extra potential to publish some other data sets as well. So that it keeps growing slowly and organically. And you add extra functionality to your applications and third-party connections. It's quite a cool technology.
And I think as you've seen through the development of the application that we've spoken about here today, one of the things that we wanted to make sure we could do is have the web application, and in that instance, we've got very different user authentication rights and access going on behind the scene, with everything built into RAD Server, protecting and making sure that web application can only connect to the specific API endpoints that we want it to be able to connect into in the way that we want it to connect. So all of that is built in, and obviously out of scope for the webinar today, but
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is straight out the box, which is brilliant. So anyway, let's open up the Q&A. Thank you for joining us today, and look forward to taking through these questions. So we mentioned as we were going through in here an updated RAD Server book. David and I did a great book about 4 years ago now on RAD Server, but a lot of stuff's been added and enhanced in the product since. And there's some new stuff coming through as well. So Antonio's been working terribly hard in terms of modernizing the content and bringing it forward, and based on feedback, and it's actually been quite good to see some of the questions that have been coming through today, asking, oh, can we get some source samples to work with this. Each of the chapters in the book is going to be covered with both source code examples, but also a video taking you through the chapter, the development of the source code samples and how to use them to get you up to speed and being able to work with those very, very quickly. And based on feedback from the original book, it's going to be simplified in the way it's put together, but also highlighting out kind of key points, and then providing the source code examples externally, which are going to be in GitHub, so we can keep those updated, adding new additional things in, and keep everything kind of live and updated as well. So it's going to be a very exciting new format for us to bring through. Anything else you want to say about the book, Antonio? Maybe
yeah, well, I'm working really hard to reorganize a bit. It's not going to be a whole PDF, like 200 something pages as it was the previous one. The content was very, very good. It just needed some updates for the new features that have been added to RAD Server in the latest versions. And the concept, I think, is going to be easier to follow. The chapters has been split in individual projects, and everything will be uploaded on GitHub with demos. And also, we're going to release a first batch of chapters, and then progressively we will keep adding new chapters in a much faster way than just releasing a massive book, because the repository approach will let us give in a more fluent progression to the documentation.
Cool. There's a question here from Mike, just asking about the licensing side of things. Mike, probably easiest thing to do if you want to just message through to your local regional office or distributing partner, whoever you get your licenses from. We can kind of have a direct conversation with you. Basically, at the moment, there's a single site license in the Enterprise edition, and that allows you to run multiple servers at the same site, so you can load balance across if you've got high volume and demand coming through. But that's from like a single location, if that makes sense. The multi-site license allows you, for example, as a company, you might have regional copies of things for speed and performance and latency and everything. So you might have stuff in Australia and stuff in London and stuff in New York and stuff in Frankfurt or wherever. That's what the multi-site license is for. If you're deploying it out and you're leaving it on site with customers and you're providing it as software that you're selling through, then we do have OEM options that you can kind of chat to, or we have the IB Lite, sorry, not the IB Lite, the RAD Server Lite version, which is free to distribute, and that's really kind of aimed at where you might want to be deploying it out to, for example, 30 or 40 stores where you're going to have 10, 15 people connecting into the system. That's the type of thing that's designed for. When you're looking at kind of full server side, then that's really when you want to be scaling up. And the great thing is, if you start off using RAD Server Lite and you decide that you actually want to take it up the level and move to the full version, it's all the same stuff. You just need to update the deployment with the kind of the server version, but all the modules and the configuration are still pretty much the same.
Yeah, there's a question about if the old book is still available, and it is. You can download it. I don't remember now. We share the QR code, but you can search for the book on Google. is still available, and it will probably still be available after the release of the new one. But yeah, you can still find that, and you can download it for free.
Yeah, if you go to the, I think it's, I'm just having a quick look.
I think it was in the blogs.
It's on the blogs, yeah. Yeah, blogs.embarcadero.com, and then search for RAD Server there.
Yeah, that's a link there to download it for free.
Yeah, there's people asking about examples and stuff like that. Check out the blogs, blogs.embarcadero.com, and also check out my blog, delphiable.co.uk. There's quite a lot of examples and samples there to be able to pick up and work through.
Going to paste the links in the chat in a second.
Okay, great, thank you. So there's quite a few of the questions we've asked. Oh, there's a question here around security and how best to set up HTTPS and that type of side of things. Obviously, if you're running it under a web server, then your web server will be taking care of the HTTPS by itself. That's all there. So that's a reason why it's not kind of integrated directly into the product. If you're running it as a standalone application, then probably the recommendation would be to use a reverse proxy. That's a nice, easy way to be able to hook it up and secure it. I've been doing that with an instance that I've been running, and it's great. That manages the certificate for me and then provides the full security and allows me to scale and move around and do whatever I want to do on the back end behind it. And there's lots of different reverse proxies, depending on where you're kind of deploying out to. But that's a pretty standard way of doing that now. And then using that as part of your kind of your route through and protecting the network traffic through that way. A few comments about thanks for the overview on the REST side of things. It's helped to make it a bit clearer for people, so that's always nice to hear. Thank you. It's always a difficult balance when we're doing a webinar, because we know there's going to be a number of you who know what REST is and how it works, but equally, we've got an awful lot of developers online and a number of them who are kind of maybe long-term VCL developers or people who are kind of been working with databases for a long time and are not quite sure how the other bits kind of work through in the same way. So it's always good to be able to kind of get the mix. So thank you for your patience if you kind of knew all that stuff, but also thank you for the comments for the detail there. That's always nice to hear. Mentioned about the new book. Yes, more requests for comment for samples and stuff. So let's say, please keep an eye out, especially on the blogs. I know there'll be quite a bit of stuff going out on the emails once the book's up and ready. We're looking to have that out at some point during September. So we're not far away from kind of having that there, and there will be a whole load of samples coming up onto GitHub for you to download as well. So I think that'll help a lot of you kind of get up and get going. Just one last question, I think, and then we're almost at the top of the hour. So there's a question about interbase with RAD Server. How does it work? So yeah, with RAD Server you can connect to any database. So if your system is built on Oracle or SQL Server or MySQL or Firebird or Postgres or Hadoop or whatever, you can connect to whatever you want to connect to on the back end, just as you would do with any Delphi application today. Where the interbase part comes in is you can connect to interbase and serve data out through interbase, that's fine. But RAD Server itself, to provide a lot of the capabilities with the user security and the role-based configuration, all the other kind of stuff that fits into that, it needs somewhere secure to store the data. Now, rather than saying, okay, well, you need to make sure you've got full data encryption at rest and provide a database server and everything in, which, if you're on a web server and you're doing with SQL Server, you could be looking at 50K for the full license server and everything. We have interbase embedded into it. Interbase, it's an IoT award-winning database. It's got full encryption at rest. So we can safely deploy it and store that and provide you a very rich capability straight out of the box. And because it's suited to be deployed in any situation, it makes it ideal for deployment on the light version and also on the full server version. It will easily handle the load that's coming through, and as the case studies for Interbase will show. So it's a nice, easy way to kind of manage all that, and it then manages and provides you all the analytics and everything out the back end of it as well. So, okay. Antonio, any closing comments?
Not really. As I mentioned in during the presentation, if you haven't tried RAD Server, just give it a go. It's right there already in the IDE. So just create a project, link it to one of your databases, and just play around with it. And start small and keep growing from there. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, then we're at the top of the hour. We're out of time for today. So thank you very much for everybody all around the world for joining us today. And we've had an awful lot of hellos from an awful lot of countries in here today. So always nice to see you online. Thanks for joining us. And happy coding, everybody. And chat to you soon. Take care.
Bye.